frozen for me right now.
Okay, so while we wait for Kate to join us, welcome. We're connecting all over, and in this case, we're connecting virtually, but even in normal lives, we are just connected across the hall. So Kate is on her way, joining us back, but in the meantime, please welcome Shannon from Niijkiwendidaa Anishnaabekwewag Service Circle. Welcome to these KSAT Connections.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Fabulous. So as Kate is coming back, do you want to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do with Niij?
Absolutely. So I am Shannon O'Connor. I'm the Indigenous Youth and Transition Worker for Niijkiwendidaa Anishnaabekwewag Services Circle. So I work with youth from ages 16 up to 24. And it's just transitioning into adulthood. So a lot of them are in care. So we're just making sure they have the life skills, the supports that they have that'll help prepare them for adulthood.
Perfect. Okay. And maybe do you want to introduce Kate while Kate's coming back?
Yeah, so Kate will be joining us. She's our Aboriginal Transitional Housing Worker. So she supports women in attaining their housing needs, whether that's filling out applications, whatever it may look like. And we have a partnership with Anishinaabe Homes in Oshawa. So we actually have a building there, which Kate is a support for the tenants there.
And so I love you guys. We are all on like the same floor, 150 King Street, third floor. And I think it's a really important collaboration, and even right now, a really important time to have these conversations, especially about Indigenous voices, with it being Indigenous History Month here in Canada. So just to rewind a little bit, do you want to talk about what has happened with your center since the onset of this pandemic of COVID-19?
Absolutely. So our services look a little different than they did before, but we're still open. We just aren't having clients actually in our building. So we are doing virtual appointments with our clients. We're doing them over the phone, whatever we can do to support our clients through this time. So we're absolutely accessible if you give us a call or email. So for my program, my email is ayit@niijki.com. We're still doing referrals. We're doing intakes. So feel free to reach out if you feel that our supports may benefit you.
Amazing. And Kate, we were just getting into what's happening at your center right now, but and Shannon gave you a brief introduction and did very well, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Sorry about that. I got cut out. I'll do my nice proper intro. Mishkeke Gitagonkwe Indigenous, Makwadodem, Nogo Jawanang and Dunjaba, Nogo Jawanang Megwadoda. So yes, my name is Katelyn Brennan. I'm from the Bear Clan. My spirit name is Medicine Gardener Woman. Born and raised in Peterborough. That's where we are right now. And I'm the Indigenous Women's Transitional Housing Worker at Niijkiwendidaa Anishnaabekwewag Services Circle. So I help women and their families who are in need of housing support, find housing, sustainable housing. And yeah, support like through housing applications. If they need funding, can try and get that. Yeah, so if you do need housing support, you can contact me through my email. I'm having trouble with my voicemail right now, but my email is Kate, K-A-T-E, @niijki.com.
Okay, amazing. And so you're saying that all your intakes and services have gone either on the phone or through email, but I noticed too on your Facebook you have or like a women's circle group that meets up. Do you want to talk more about that?
So right now, there's a couple of groups happening virtually. So every Tuesday, 1 to 3, there's a wellness group. That's closed, so if you're interested, you can get a hold of Samantha. So that's SAMANTHAT @niijki.com, so NIIJKI.com. And then we also have a women's talking circle every other Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. That's open. You just need to get a hold of, again, Samantha and she can get you set up with the Zoom links and whatnot. And then every Wednesday, if you hook up with our Facebook page, we have our Melissa.
Who is actually watching now. So hi, Melissa.
Hi, Melissa. Yeah, she does a story time every Wednesday, and she's very fun to watch and kind of relaxing too, and have the whole family gather around and listen to her story time. It's really nice.
Awesome. And so have you noticed any shifts in the certain requests for services, what people are looking for since the onset of this pandemic, or has everything for you guys kind of carried on as usual in terms of certain types of service requests?
I feel like the service requests have, for me, it's kind of been the same, just more high volume, and just more urgent. So there's still a need. And it's also hard to go to viewings and things when we have to keep that social distance. So trying to facilitate that between landlords and tenants and things like that.
Yeah, Shannon?
And with my program, it's still fairly similar. We're having some increases in anxieties and those kind of things, just dealing with COVID and all the differences that it's going to bring to our services and just our everyday life, right? So we're continuing our support through doing our one-on-ones via like video chat or calls if we can. And I still am having my youth group going on. So if you check our Facebook page, I have the link for it and it'll have all the dates that we have, and it's virtual now. So it looks a little different. We're not all able to sit in the same room and have a meal and that kind of stuff, but we can still connect and have that little chance to check in with each other and see each other. And yeah.
Definitely there's been a shift in more immediate grounding anxiety needs because there are so many uncertainties in the world right now. And what I've heard from some survivors is that this has almost given them an opportunity to ground themselves, because in everyday life, you're supposed to be normal, right? But when you experience anxieties, it's like, oh, we've got to work with you. But right now, everyone's anxious. So it's almost like they've given themselves permission to heal in some cases. And, in other cases that those anxiousness, those anxieties have only been exacerbated and increased with all of a sudden having to reside in the home with someone who may not be making your home safe, all of a sudden not having access to those resources that you used to have, not having access to the phone, etc. So there's a lot of different things coming into play with this. And now, believe it or not, we are in June. But it's June 4th. Yeah, we had some like, whoa, it's June in my meetings today, which means it's National Indigenous History Month. Before I get into asking about National Indigenous History Month and its importance, I just want to talk about a quote that we heard a couple days ago from a political figure. I don't have time to watch the news. Oh. Hi, Kate. I know, I wanted to leave too as soon as I heard this.
Right?
Time to watch the news. The US has their issues, but it's like night and day. Canada and the US, Canada won't tolerate it. We don't have systemic deep roots that they've had for years. And that was from a particular political figure. Shannon, do you want to talk about why Indigenous History Month is so important?
Unfortunately, in Canada, our history is very filtered, we can say, to what it wants to be perceived as, where a lot of our history was not shared. And it's really unfortunate, the things that happened, and terrible. So having this month, it allows us to have awareness, to have these conversations, to hopefully bridge that gap between our knowledge on what Canada's true history is and making sure people are aware of it.
Kate, do you have anything to add to why Indigenous History Month is so important to reflect on and educate yourself about?
Absolutely, and that's the most important thing, is self-educate, educate yourself. There's so many resources online. Learn about the important Indigenous leaders of the past, you know? And it's important to remember that just because the history is in the name of this day, that Indigenous people aren't a part of history, and they very much are alive today. So it's important to celebrate those people and ensure that there's visibility of Indigenous people, and that includes First Nation, Métis, and Inuit.
I was watching was it World of Dance, and there were some incredible powwow dancers on there, and Derek Hoff was like, you know, it's so amazing to see you bringing the history of your culture into the present. And I'm like, no, Derek, this happens right now, and we don't see it. You're right. We don't. This is something that's not on the media, and we don't hear about powwows happening, and that it's typically through a very negative lens. Whenever we talk about Indigenous issues, let's look at missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. Let's look at what's happening in the communities close to us. We also look at residential schools, the 60 scoop, the childcare system. I'm going to put that in quotes. Do you guys want to talk more about those?
And I think it's important to acknowledge that powwows and celebrating culture was illegal at one point for people to have their own space to acknowledge their history and their culture with their people. And we need to celebrate that and acknowledge that this is a part, that the fact that these teachings are still happening, the powwows are still happening, that was hard for that culture to stay through that time. People were put in a lot of danger, and to keep that language and the cultural ceremonies going, it's huge. So we need to make sure that we're trying to acknowledge that and trying to educate ourselves on these things, because a lot of people aren't aware that the cultures and the ceremonies were illegal for a period of time.
I remember in terms of my education, like I barely learned about Indigenous history throughout high school. It wasn't until I got to university where I really started to learn about land acknowledgements as a first step, but then learn about the history and, you know, why having a statue of a political figure from a time that said, oh, these Indians are not able to have rights, and the really horrific language that was attached to that. Kate, do you want to go more into this history?
I was just gonna go and say that these issues like missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit, and even boys and men, it's not just an Indigenous issue, it's a Canadian issue. Same with like colonization. It's not up to just Indigenous people to, you know, dismantle that. That's up to everybody, and mostly non-Indigenous people.
Yeah, we keep talking about it as, oh, this is a history, we need to reflect on the history, but a lot of these injustices, all of these injustices are still happening right now to Indigenous folk. And I came across some stats that that compared Canada's original population to the African-American population in the United States. And I don't know if any of you have seen this graph, but unemployment rate was higher compared for Aboriginal Canadians than it was for African-Americans. Unemployment rate versus the national rate higher for Aboriginal Canadians. Median income versus the national average was lower for Aboriginal Canadians versus African Americans. Incarceration rate higher for Aboriginal Canadians than it was for African Americans. Homicide rate versus the national rate higher for Aboriginal Canadians versus African Americans. Infant mortality rate higher for Aboriginal Canadians versus African Americans. And so for certain political figures to sit here and go, oh, I don't know about it because I don't have time to watch the news. And the recent quote today, oh, it exists, but you know, I didn't suffer these hardships, so I don't really know. My cabinet, what do you say? My chamber doesn't really know, so we don't know. Like, I guess it happens, but we don't know. So how do we know?
Well, and that's the problem. It's just because something isn't personally affecting us as an individual, we need to step up if we see something that isn't right. And if we wouldn't be okay with that happening to us, why are we okay with that happening to someone else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kate, do you have anything to say?
Well, we always focus. I mean, there's so much negative and bad. It's hard not to focus on it. But I think with National Indigenous History Month, that's a chance for us to look at the good that happens. So, like, there's beautiful art. There's, beautiful music that comes out. I don't know, what other things have you guys seen that's beautiful, that's positive?
Art, dances, TikToks. There's been some amazing TikToks. Yeah.
Drum circles.
Healing opportunities.
Mm-hmm. There's so many beautiful things that come out through culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And, with everything that's happening right now with the Black Lives Matter protest happening, with it being Pride Month, with it being Indigenous History Month, there is really an intersection of all of this. I think yesterday I said they are movements within a movement. They're not their own kind of off movement. They're all within the movement of human rights, really, and that they are connected. So do you guys have anything to say to that side of things?
It's like battles. There's lots of battles to win the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think through this time for me personally, as being a white settler, it's important for me to acknowledge my privilege and acknowledge using my privilege for as much good as I can, and trying to make as much change as I can through this time too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And what is it about Indigenous Month that we should look for? I know Kate mentioned like the positive side of things, but there's a whole mixture. And so what are some good resources? Are you folks good resources? Who would you connect folks to?
So yeah, Niijkiwendidaa is a great resource, and if we don't know something, we'll definitely find out for you or point you in the right direction. The Friendship Center in Peterborough here is another great resource. They've got lots of cultural programming, which is great. Google can be your best friend. There's so many resources on there, and you just type it in, have a go, explore, and ensure that the sources you're reading from are credible, which sometimes can be difficult, but you learn along the way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Definitely. And is there something that you would want folks to learn about Indigenous history that you're like, look this up, your mind's going to be blown? And whether that's a positive light or negative light, what about Indigenous history would you want people to get off their butts and to learn about, to educate themselves about? It could be good or bad.
Well, because now it's June, I think it would be really special if people took the time to learn about the strawberry moon, and that's the heart fruit, that's heart medicine, and I think that's what we all kind of need a little bit of right now.
Yeah, could you maybe explain a little bit more about, without spoiling too much, because I saw an article that the strawberry moon is coming up as well.
So the strawberry moon, this Odaimin Geezes is what we call. We used to have a celebration in Peterborough here too with a big powwow, but costs a lot of money. But the strawberry, it resembles a heart if you take a look at it. So it's good for the heart. It's also very vulnerable if you think about it, because all of its seeds are on the outside. So it's just a little tidbits, I don't know, to get you started. Have fun with it.
Definitely. Yeah. Shannon?
I would, there's so much. I'd say start off with, oh my gosh, I don't even know. I'm going blank. There's so much, like I can't identify what to start with or nothing's more important than the other. It just start looking and see where it leads you.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, there's, an unfortunate balance that you have to understand what was residential schools, and how they were still happening. Like, they're not something that was like generations ago. Like, I think the last one was 1994.
Yeah, or 1996. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that less than 30? I hope that's less than 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So less than 30 years ago, this was still happening. So, we need to know that, this is not just some of Canada's bad history that we are burning books about, which was something that was happening. But, as something that people are still dealing with, we think of things of like intergenerational trauma, and how it's not just the person who went to the residential school that was harmed, but really that impacts the entire family. And I think one thing that's really special with Niche is that, yes, there's a women's focus, but you folks support the entire family. Maybe I can go to Kate. Why is that so important?
Well, we look at everything with a holistic lens, so we can't work on the family or with the family with just one individual, right? It has to be the whole group. So they've got to be get on the same page, sort of thing, and even looking outwards into community. So, yeah. Did I answer that?
Yeah. Like, I feel like if you do all the work, and so, yeah, if you do all the work and you come home and that kind of toxic environment is still there, like, you breathe that in and you hold that in your heart, you hold that in your spirit, your emotions, and it impacts the entire body. And so, you can do all the work, but if the environment around you is still harming you, is still impacting you in a negative way, it's may not set you totally back, but it's going to make that uphill battle even more steeper.
And it'll be constant work. Yeah, it's constant work for everybody, because if you look at the environment we're in right now, it's constantly like an offense, constantly defensive. So it's constant work, healing work on yourself,
And healing journeys all look different for every individual too. So it's not like we're going to start it and by tomorrow everything will be better, but every day we're getting somewhere different, right? And we're working on our healing, and we're working positively towards ourselves and our family. So
Tracy on our Instagram, or sorry, on our Facebook just said 1 to 2 generations is no time at all when it comes to systemic injustice and trauma. Lisa also says hello. And I hold that so, it's so true that, it doesn't just magically get better. This is something that it impacts an entire family. And that's why I'm so happy that you work with the entire family. One question I have is because Shannon talked about how healing journeys look different for each person. So how do you navigate that within your work?
It really depends on the individual, because just because we're an Indigenous organization, we might have somebody that comes in who isn't interested in the cultural aspects at all. So, maybe we won't do that. We look at other things. We use Western ways of healing. Yeah. Sorry, you ask a question and then I get all these thoughts going in, and then I lose track of what the question is.
So essentially, how do you navigate various healing journeys within your work?
Yeah, so like I said, it's very up to the individual and what they're looking for.
Just communication too, right?
Yeah.
Seeing what they're going through, where they're at, and where we're at in our life stages that can depend on what our healing can look like too, and also our experiences personally and what we've dealt with. And just because someone may not necessarily start off with culture doesn't mean that down the road they may not end up accessing culture as well, right? So it all just depends on where they're at and what they're looking for, and we do our best to support them or to navigate where their supports would be best fitted.
And Shannon, you've also talked about in presentations that we've done together that you don't need to be of status to access your supports and resources. I think that's really important, but you guys want to divulge more into why that's so important?
Yeah, so you don't need a status card to access our services. We don't need proof of heritage. You can be self-identifying First Nation, Métis, Inuit. And it's really important because with the things that have happened in Canada, some people can't, they don't know their history, they don't have access to it, so there's no way of getting the status card. And it's unfair to deprive them of you know, healing opportunities that they're looking for. So yeah, we don't require that.
Because colonization also had an effect on how many people were able to attain their status and keep their status. So yeah, we don't want to create any barriers for our clients. We want to be able to support them as best as we can.
Our services are also free at no cost to use. So.
And if you're confused as to what is a status card and, well, if you're Indigenous, shouldn't you have one? Another great avenue for you to research and understanding systemic oppression that is happening in Canada. It's it makes me very angry, you know, hearing about the fact that, oh, I forget which member of your center it was. So I'm not sure if it was Shannon or Melissa, or maybe it was even Sam, that said Indigenous culture is the only culture that you need like a card for to identify with. Or maybe it was like the spiritual connection side of it. But yeah, that really impacted me, because you think about like, well, you know, you don't need a card to identify as Christian or Muslim or, you know, whatever religious ideology you align with. But for Indigenous, you all of a sudden do.
Oh, and that comes with colonization over the years too, right? So yeah.
Keep a count on them, right?
And that's it, right? Yeah.
Would you say people count on them?
Let's keep a count on them.
Like, that's how it started. Because a lot of people were stuck to their reservations, had to get permission if they wanted to leave their reservation. Again, research.
When you start your research journey, you'll find that you'll end up with a lot more questions than you started with. But that's learning, right?
And kind of a mind-blown sensation at one point of like, how have I not been educated more on this growing up in Canada?
I was doing a workshop at Nogojawan, and one of the white identifying people there was talking about this anger, this animosity, this frustration. And the elder that was there said, let go of that. We're here now. And how do we move forward? How do we rectify these things? You have taken a small step, but there's many more steps in your journey with us as part of this earth, as connected to this earth. And that, you know, it's okay to identify that, but let it go, because you need to be here right now with us. And that anger is not going to heal anyone. It's not going to heal yourself, and it's not going to make us feel any better, referring to the community there. Sorry, anything to say to that?
So it's really easy to feel angry. And if you're non-Indigenous, it's easy to feel guilty. But yeah, it's okay to feel those feelings, but understand where it comes from, then use it for good. You know, yeah, like I said before, use it to dismantle the systems that are in place that are continuing these, you know, racist ways. So the first step would be self-education. You can't just go in and help people when you don't know anything, right? And also you're not going in to help, you know, you're working with.
Yeah.
Lisa on our Facebook, she's the director here at KSAC. Awesome, Kate. There are so many ways of traditional healing that have been appropriated or integrated into Western resources. She was also wondering, is the Strawberry Moon tonight?
I think so, yeah.
I feel like it's really soon.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, cool. So the Strawberry Moon, is it like a certain peak where like it hits that? Oh, I think we're losing Kate.
Yeah.
The Strawberry Moon, does it like hit a certain peak, or? Oh, there you are. With the Strawberry Moon, is it that it hits a certain peak, or is it just kind of like that for the whole night?
So that's something that I would have to self-educate, because I don't know for sure. I don't know. So I'll have to learn about that myself. And I leave that upon everybody else to do.
And it's so okay to identify that you don't know and that we have to learn. So if you're ever in a situation where you're like, I don't know, ask, you know, or educate yourself. Don't feel that you need to rely on all Indigenous peoples to educate you on Indigenous peoples.
There's definitely a fine line for me wanting to learn more about smudging, and I approached Shannon and said, you know, you can answer my question, or you can tell me to go onto Google and figure it out myself. But you know, there's a level of respect that comes from learning about this, and there's no harm in reaching out. But when you're like, well, this is how it is, prove it wrong to me, it's not a good mindset to come into learning, right? If you already have a certain thought pattern, especially when it's rooted in colonized racist knowledge, that, you know, to really come in with an open heart and to really learn about the realities of the world.
And I'll mention, it's important to remember that if you hear something from one Indigenous person, it doesn't mean that it applies to all Indigenous people. You know, everybody has different teachings. There's no right or wrong. It's, you know, it's as long as it's done in a good way. But that, like, if someone were to tell you, no, that's not, you know, right. That's the colonist thinking coming back, you know, which happens.
Definitely. If people want to learn more about Niche or wants to get connected to your resources, what are the various mediums that they can do that?
We have our Facebook page, and we have our website. So our website is www.niijki.com, and our services are on there. Our contact info is on there, as well as on Facebook. And I can post underneath the comments of our email addresses, if that would be helpful for people looking to reach out. Yeah.
Awesome. Any last words as we are wrapping up here, whether it's about Indigenous History Month or these intersections of Black Lives Movement, Pride, anything that you want to speak about? Maybe Kate, I'll start with you.
Black Lives Matter.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shannon, anything that you want to add?
I agree with Kate. Black Lives Matter, and try to show love and understanding and communicate before reacting.
Definitely. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We've had a good number of people watching this stream, and so I appreciate you tuning in today. Be sure to connect to all of our resources. Indigenous TikTok is very lit. If you have a moment to check out Indigenous TikTok, Notorious Cree is one of my faves. It's awesome. So anyway, thank you everyone so much. Thank you so much, Niijkiwendidaa. I genuinely appreciate your time and taking time to check in and to connect with everyone today.
Thank you.
Yeah, much for having us, and don't be afraid to reach out to us if you have any questions.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you everyone so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.